hold on to your handlebars. We're ready for another episode of MB2 Underground, where we pedal through the twists and turns of dentistry. No training wheels needed. Just consider us the tandem bike of podcasts. My co-hosts steers, and I provide the balance. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sarah Kiefer.
I'm Jonathan Tyrock, better known as JT. Hey, Sarah.
Hey, how's it going?
That's great. How are you today?
Good. I had to take a couple of Peloton classes to learn all the cycling puns, but
I wonder why you started with cycling today.
I'm excited. I prepped.
You did.
You should be proud of me.
Well, I am particularly excited to introduce our guest today. An incredible resume. I think we're going to probably pull quite a bit of not only fun kind of business points, but I was spending some time earlier in the green room with him, and I think there's a lot of just kind of fun anecdotes personally as well. So,
Well, hopefully he cycles. Otherwise, this is really awkward.
Oh, no, he's actually a skier, not a cycler. I think you read that wrong.
I think you're right. Well, let's find out.
Okay, so our guest today is Paul Keel. He is the CEO of Envista, and Envista is a specialty products and technology company. They have over 30 brands underneath their umbrella, which includes Nobel Biocare. You heard of that one?
Yeah, once or twice.
How about Ormco?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
How about Dexys? Implant Direct?
Yep.
Yep, all those and more.
Nice.
So Paul's joining us today. I want to give a little shout out to his background because it is so impressive. So I'm going to read something directly and go off or maybe on script here. But Paul, prior to Envista, he was the CEO of the Smiths Group, which is a FTSE 100 global technology company. That's the number one stock exchange in London.
Footsie?
Yes, that's how you
like when little kids
pronounce it.
kick each other under the table?
The FTSE.
That's cute.
He led the organization to record growth and profitability when he took over. He turned things around. And before that, he worked at 3M, for almost 2 decades. Before that, in consulting with McKinsey, had a little stint in private equity. So there is a wealth of knowledge sitting across the table from us. So without any further delay, welcome, Paul.
Thank you, JT. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Whose intro did you like better? Mine with the cycling puns or his with all of your really cool things you've done?
Well, you kind of got the straight guy and you got the color commentary. So the two go together. You guys are a talented duo.
Balance, tandem bike.
Yeah, see, the problem is I like to be the color commentator too. So that's
Too bad.
Part of what maybe makes us great or not. I don't know. We'll find out.
You guys do the color, I'll be straight guy.
There we go.
Fair enough.
Okay, so I know I did a lot of work on the cycling commentary. Can you tell us a little bit about your favorite pastime?
My favorite pastime.
As long as it's cycling. If it's anything else, we've got to switch it up.
Yeah, I would say I'm an enthusiastic but unaccomplished cyclist. So we can probably talk a little bit of biking.
Okay, so I do it on a Peloton, so mine is stationary. Do you do it on the streets or in the grass or in the mountains?
So let's see. Broadly speaking, there's 4 kinds of biking.
Okay.
There is on a trainer inside. So I do
Shout out.
that. You know, when we lived in London, I did a lot inside because it's cold, it rains, and there's a lot of traffic. And then there's 3 outdoor kinds. There's road cycling, think Tour de France, people in Lycra.
Okay.
My wife discourages me from doing a lot of that.
Fair.
There's mountain biking, which everybody kind of knows what that is from when we were kids. You don't have to wear spandex for that, so that's acceptable. And then there's this thing called gravel riding, which is a cross between mountain bike riding and road riding. So it looks like a road bike, or what you and I would call a 10-speed.
Okay.
But it's got thicker tires and a softer frame, and so you can ride down hills and trails and that kind of thing.
So of those, which is your favorite to do?
I like all of them pretty equally. The only kind of biking I don't like is the kind that goes uphill.
Fair enough.
I have a long-standing disagreement with gravity, and heretofore it's gotten the better of the argument.
Yep. So mountain biking, when you said that, it makes me chuckle inside. My family and I one summer went to Colorado, and we're going up into the mountains. Our kids have never been during the summer, and there's a ton to do. And we're at the bottom of the lift to take us to the top of the mountain. And my wife looks around, and there's all these people with bikes. She goes, is there a mountain biking convention here? Like, what are these people doing, and why are they taking their bikes up?
Yeah.
And I said, honey, that's what you do in Colorado in the summer. You take it up and you bike it down. And
That's
she's
the
like,
best kind of mountain biking. Yep. You don't have to go uphill.
That's
it's all
right.
downhill.
That's
That was
right.
terrifying. We rode our bikes across and did like San Francisco. We did like a bike tour. It's very hilly. It was very horrible. It was really pretty driving, or riding across the bridge and into Sausalito. That was really cool. But it was because it was downhill. I think the bar was pretty low at that point. How did you get into cycling?
JT and I were talking about this before. Long time ago, decades ago, I used to do triathlons. But over time, my knees got bad. And so I don't run anymore, but I still swim a little and still bike a little.
Easier on the joints.
Way easier, yeah.
That's awesome.
So, Paul, I'm going to have to dig into your knees got bad because there's a point that I want to get out here. You lived in London. I have a particular interest in London because I'm a big soccer or proper football person, man, whatever you want to call me. So tell us why you mentioned to me your knees got bad because you played soccer in college. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And so when you were with Smiths living in London, I have to imagine you picked up some sort of allegiance to maybe a Premier League team.
Yep,
So
for sure.
Who do you support?
So I support a not a very accomplished team called the Southampton Saints. They're at the dead bottom of the EPL, the English Premier League right now. And they became my team because my largest customer rooted for them. So he thought it'd be funny when I first came across to bring an American to a proper football game. He had this view, from Ted Lasso and other things that Americans had no idea what soccer was. And then over time he realized, I have immigrant European parents, so they never even knew what American football was. All we ever knew was proper football.
Yep.
So anyway, we hit it off well, and he had 4 season tickets, and I ended up buying one of his season tickets. So the first time we lived in England, I went to, they have 18 games, 19 home games a year. Wow. And I'd probably go to 17 or 18 of them.
So it's on my bucket list. I haven't been yet. We've got small kids who appreciate and enjoy the sport as well. And so we're trying to figure out when to take our kids. But one of the things I've always wondered, when's the best time to go over there and watch a game? Having lived there, what would you say?
Well, if you want to watch an EPL game, Coach, you got to go during the season.
That's right.
Which is the winter, basically, which is not the best time weather-wise for England. And then make sure you don't hit one of the international breaks. So, every country has a soccer team, and England has very good soccer. So most of the English Premier League players are also on a national team. So make sure you don't get an international break. And then they take some holidays, not many, but they take some holidays off. So sometime in the winter, London's super pretty around Christmas.
Okay.
That type of thing's probably a good place to target.
So maybe Boxing Day.
I'm sorry, I'm going way off script here. You mentioned you had immigrant parents from Europe.
Yeah.
I want to know a little bit more about your backstory. I think you'd mentioned parent A from Ireland, parent B from Switzerland.
Excellent
I just
memory.
don't remember who A and B is.
So that's a kind of a funny story. So my parents both emigrated in the 50s. And my dad's story is, both of them are interesting, but my dad's story is particularly interesting. He's this electrical engineer from Switzerland. He grew up on the German border in the 30s during World War II and the Depression.
Wow, sounds like a fun time in history.
Great time to be on the German border. And he and his brother, who was also an engineer, wanted to practice their languages. So, in Switzerland, they speak a number of languages, and then everybody wants to learn English. So they would go to junkyards, and they would steal, he would say harvest, parts of vehicles.
Procure.
Semantics, it doesn't matter.
And they built what he calls a ham radio. I think we'd call it a shortwave radio. And
Would we? I don't know what a shortwave radio is.
Oh, you're too young. When I was a kid, there were shortwave radios where you could, they would have longer range than AM or FM radios.
Okay.
Anyway, long story short, they built this ham radio so that they could practice their languages, and Dad was talking to an American practicing his English. And the guy was just being polite and said, well, Beat is my dad's name. That's a Swiss name. If you're ever in Minneapolis,
Oh my gosh.
give me a call. We are always looking for good engineers. And my dad took that
Oh
as
my
an
gosh.
invitation
That's
to
awesome.
travel from Switzerland in the 50s all the way to the coast, get on a boat, go to New York. He goes to the headquarters of a company called Sperry Univac at the time. It became Controlled Data. Today, it's probably its closest derivative is Seagate, which is a publicly traded storage company.
Yeah, for sure.
And he shows up in the lobby and says, can you call JT? I'm here for my job. And the guy comes down and says, who are you? And Dad says, I'm Beat Keel. You said if I was ever in Minneapolis, I'd have a job. Well, here I am.
This is insane because you told me right at the start that you were from around Minneapolis, Minnesota. So your father made a ham radio, walkie-talkies with some American, and takes that and runs with it.
Yeah. I mean, this is kooky
That's
stuff.
amazing.
That's what people did back then.
I just wish I had balls like that, like just to aha, I'm here.
I mean, but
And it worked. He got his job.
yeah.
Yeah, and then Mom was there. Mom's a nurse, and this was back when the Mayo Clinic was becoming a big thing.
Does she have an accent?
She's passed now, but she has a lovely Irish accent, which comes through if she's around Irish people. But she lived, from the 50s until she died in America. Anyway, the Mayo Clinic was doing a similar sort of thing. They didn't have enough nurses, so they would charter a boat and go to Dublin and say, any Irish nurse who wants to come to America will pay your travel across. She came across, worked at the Mayo Clinic. She and Dad met at a single Catholics get together in Minneapolis and put down roots and
that is wild.
Rest of their lives in rural, third ring suburbia of Minneapolis.
And had 6 kids.
6 kids. God, your memory's outstanding.
Thank you. I've been working on it. It's the ginkgo biloba.
I don't think that's how you pronounce it. So you've got 5 brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
You grew up in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
I want to shift a little bit to like business points because I want to hear about Envista and certainly your role. But as I looked and I researched your background and your career path, one question stood out to me or came to me, which is, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So I grew up in this weird family. My dad, as you picked up, is a quirky guy.
Oh, I'm obsessed.
And he had an influence on his kids. So the kids are all a little odd. 2 of my brothers are math professors.
Sick.
One is a PhD educator. One is an MD medical researcher. One's an architect. And that was my path as well. You'd go to graduate school and you'd become an academic.
Where do you fall in line with the siblings?
In terms of age, I am 5 of 6.
Okay, got it.
In terms of SAT scores, I'm dead last.
Okay.
But you're like seeing this progression of like, this is what happens in our
It's
family.
just what you did in our family.
So you grew up with a bunch of nerds is what you're saying.
Yeah, a bunch of.
Okay.
So in college, my junior year, 2 of my brothers were studying at the University of Chicago. One was getting his PhD, one was an undergrad, and there was some, you walk through the student union, and there was some flyer on the wall for a scholarship for the summer in Chicago. And I said, great, I'll go hang out with Mark and Sean. And it was at something called the GSB, which I didn't care. I figured it was, some academic program. It was the Graduate School of Business at the University of Chicago. So I go, and that was the first exposure anyone in my family ever had to business. And that is what first got me interested in not being an academic. So, after college, interviewed like anyone else, got a job, and off we go.
Started, and here you are. Was there anything?
I was just another funny. It was becoming a story about my dad, but in our family, everybody goes to graduate school. The other ones studied math at Princeton, University of Chicago. I mean, real credible institutions.
You're no slouch yourself. Harvard Business School.
Well, that's the funny story. So I call Dad and I say, "Hey, Dad, good news. I got into a good school." And he's like, "That is fantastic. Good for you. I knew you could do it." And he said, "What are you going to study? Are you going to study math?" And I said, "No, I'm going to study business." And to this day, I remember him saying, why? Here you get into this great school. Why would you waste it on business school?
Turn into the black sheep of the family real
Yes,
fast.
I guess that's right. So that's how I got interested in business.
Okay.
A long way to answer your question.
Okay, so interested in business. Was there anything in particular that drew you to healthcare, or how did you get into healthcare?
Yeah. That was by happenstance. My wife's a physician, so I was always interested in medicine, but just by luck. When I worked at this consulting firm, the first couple of projects I got were healthcare projects.
Okay.
You know how these consulting things work. You do one project, you become an expert.
Yep.
So I did a 6-week project, and I was a healthcare expert, and that's how I became a healthcare executive.
And you wanted to stay with it. There was just something about healthcare that kept you. And I mean, it eventually evolved into dentistry too.
Yeah. So my first gig in dental, I've been in and out of dental now for 20 years. Different parts of healthcare, as JT said. I did a little pharma, a little drug delivery, a little bit of med tech. But my first real leadership job was at 3M, leading their specialty dental business in California, interestingly enough. Which is where Envista is headquartered. And that's when I got a taste for it. And you guys know, because you work in dental, it is a special industry.
Yeah.
So it's special from a clinical perspective, and it's special, I think, from a market perspective.
And a human perspective.
And a human perspective.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really like the industry because it's, it doesn't matter where in the world you go. We're in 130 countries. It doesn't matter if you are working with a service provider like MB2 or a supplier like Envista or a distributor like Henry Schein. Everyone is aligned and unified by this common purpose of bringing better and broader access to oral care. Yeah. Because the clinical category is incredibly underpenetrated globally. There's 8 billion people on the planet. 5 billion need orthodontia. 4 billion are walking around with at least one missing tooth. And you would think that was a developing market phenomena. The ratio is exactly the same in the U.S.
Wow.
And then about 3.5 billion of us have unfilled cavities. So there's what makes it so interesting clinically, but it also makes it such a good market to be in because there is a perpetual, persistent disequilibrium between demand and supply.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's cool.
Those are facts and that I had no idea.
Oh, I mean,
about.
just made them up, but
well,
you guys will fact check this, right, before you publish it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
What do they say?
We'll cite your source.
70% of the facts that you hear are made up on the spot, or I don't know, something like that.
It is insane, though.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about the vast numbers of people, I mean, it's something that everybody needs. Incredible. And not every market has that expansion. How did you end up with Envista? Tell us a little bit about your journey to where you're at now.
So Envista is a interesting company. It's, Envista and its predecessor companies have been around for 134 years. One of the very first American dental companies is still part of Envista called Kerr Dental. You guys are great customers of the consumables. And over time, a big U.S. conglomerate called Danaher, really high-performing company, used to be a tools company. They decided healthcare was a more interesting category to be in than tools. So they pivoted from tools, industrial tools, to healthcare, and they picked dental as a particularly interesting sector inside of healthcare. This is the early 2000s. At that time, just before I led 3M's dental business, I had a job doing strategy and M&A for 3M. And so I was looking at buying dental companies for 3M. And Danaher was out buying all the companies that would become Envista. So I looked at all of the companies 20-something years ago that now comprise Envista.
So cool.
After that, I then competed with Envista. I ran the specialty dental business for 3M. Then I went to Europe and I ran 3M's operations for the UK and Ireland, a big part of which was dental. So I was still in it.
How long were you doing that? That's quite a change. I mean, similar, type type of industry, but obviously a whole different market.
Yeah, I mean, all these are global businesses. So when I had the specialty dental business, I was going to the UK, I was going to Brazil, I was going to China. So I had a passing familiarity with it. England's a nice place to visit because it's different enough for Americans that it's interesting, but it's not so different that it's hard.
Yeah.
Language is the same.
Yep.
You know.
You just drive on the wrong side of the road over there.
Yeah, try not to get on the right side of the road. That's when trouble starts with you.
We had one day, we spent like 3 days in Scotland, but we only spent one day in the car driving from Edinburgh to St. Andrews. And it was the most terrifying experience of my life.
Yeah.
Trying to be on the wrong side of the road. I was just being a backseat driver, but
They are good drivers in England.
Really?
Very, very polite, very rules. They're almost like Germans in terms of their rule following abilities.
I know we're like on the journey of getting to Envista, but
Yeah.
you've traveled, visited, lived in many different places. Where's your favorite place that you've lived? Not just visited, but lived.
I mean, I've lived and worked, like really lived, had a house or a lease in 4 different countries. But I've been to, I don't know, there's one of those apps that you track. I've been to 75 countries.
Oh, wow.
That's insane.
It would be easier to give you the list of places I didn't like.
Yeah, let's do that then.
Oh boy, I'm going to,
It's fine. They
irritate
can
some.
cut it.
There's parts of India that are tough.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've had some. I did a 3-week trip across India once, and there's parts of it that are tricky. Of course, there's parts of Africa that are, you see some stuff that's
Yep. Sure.
Yeah.
you wouldn't see here. It's kind of hard on the eyes.
For sure.
So
3M, you're in charge of M&A. You
Yeah.
said. I want to shift now fully over to Envista, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So Envista acquired companies over time.
Yeah.
One of my roles here, other than being Sarah's, co-host or what did you call me? The steerer of the tandem bike. I work on the development team, and we focus our conversations with prospective partners, and we do a lot of acquisitions.
Okay.
Tell me, what is it like looking at a company of size and doing an acquisition of a company of size, number one, and then number two, and shame on me for not digging into the 10K to figure this out, but have you guys acquired any companies since you've been at Envista?
So let's see, 2 questions in there. First, what's it like to acquire businesses of scale?
Yep.
I haven't bought individual dental clinics, but I suspect the process is the same. It's the same 4 steps. It starts with strategy. What type of business are you interested in and why? The second step is, seeing whether the economic model works, whether what you think it's worth can align with what they think it's worth.
Makes sense.
There's the third part, which is the transaction itself, negotiating the deal, doing the documents, all of that. And then there's all of that is just the precursor to the most important part, which is growing the business once you acquire it. So I think the process is very similar. There's probably just more zeros on the contract.
Sure.
Is kind of, I think, how it plays out. Your second question, have we done any acquisitions since I've been with Envista? The answer is no. We do a couple acquisitions a year. Last year was a bit of a slow year in the global dental market,
Sure.
so we didn't end up buying anything. But
Tell us a little bit more about what Envista is.
so Envista, I mentioned, been around for a long, long time.
134 years, yes.
You do
Memory.
have just remarkable recall.
Thank you.
So I'll answer your question 2 ways. One, many of or some of the more interesting advancements in dental across the last 100 years, you would recognize. You may not know it was Envista, but you'd recognize the innovation, like the invention of dental implants.
Okay.
That happened
Fun fact.
that happened in the early 60s. A Swedish doctor, Dr. Brennemark, was very interested in the idea of osseointegration. Can you take a metal and can you have it biointegrate, osseointegrate to the bone? So he was interested in that as a concept, and one of the applications was for replacing missing teeth. Could you put a metal implant into the mandible or the maxilla, have it integrate, and then put a crown on top of it.
Okay.
He did that in partnership with Nobel Biocare. So Dr. Brennemark and Nobel Biocare essentially invented dental implants. It's
cool.
Pretty important.
It's crazy to also think we now have dentists placing their own implants in themselves.
Yeah, we have a partner who has a podcast who goes through the story of placing an implant on himself.
And there's a whole bunch like this across Envista. The first panoramic X-ray that also comes from Envista. Wow. That's in the early 70s. Passive self-ligation, which is now a lot of fixed orthodontics, is an approach called passive self-ligation. That's a doctor named Dr. Dwight Damon in partnership with Ormco.
Wow.
Custom orthodontics was invented by someone named Dr. Craig Andraco, who was the CTO of Ormco, which is our orthodontics business. So your question, who is Envista? You would know Envista through its innovations and through its
cool.
clinical brands. Over time now it's become, a big company. Interesting factoid that our marketing people told me to work into your podcast.
Love it. Seamless as hell.
Is just smooth. I can do this all day.
Yeah.
90% of every dental clinic on the planet uses at least one Envista product.
That's
okay,
cool.
I get why your marketing team wanted you to
Pretty
say
good.
that.
It's pretty good.
Cool. That's
Right?
a good one.
90% of all
very cool.
on the planet.
Yeah. That's
and
pretty
it's
insane.
perfect because you can never really check it, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Your fact checkers will never be able to run that one down.
You're like, by the time they're done, we're all going to be way past our prime.
Yeah.
So the things that Envista has been a part of is pretty incredible. How do you go about leading a company that is so impactful globally, 90% of all of the dental offices and such?
Because I have difficulty holding a job, I've had a lot of different roles across my career.
At least you have a job.
Yeah.
Unlike your siblings.
Well, I mean, they're paid. They just
Got
don't
it.
do anything productive.
Right,
But
obviously.
They are technically employed.
Okay,
They get a W-2.
Fair.
So patterns develop across time. And I think regardless of the category I've been in, the industry or part of world or, the role I've had, a couple of things are true. One thing I think is super true, and I know it is for your business as well, that if you take care of your customers, in your case, your patients, in my case, you, and you take care of your colleagues, the rest of the stuff mostly takes care of itself.
Yeah.
Take care of your customers, take care of your colleagues, rest takes care of itself.
100% agree.
And a lot of leading a vast, interesting, diverse organization like Envista is just remembering that simple truth.
Yep. Dr. V, I'll say he really champions that same idea, both obviously at the dentist level with them taking care of their patients, and in MB2 from a support perspective, us providing our partners. I'll call them they're partners. They're not our customers, but they're our partners, allowing them to do what they want and need to do to service their patients
Exactly right.
as well as they can. And it does. It just takes care of itself. And the success kind of speaks for itself because everybody's comfortable and able to do what they went to school to do or what they know how to do. And, it's such a simple concept that I think a lot of industries and companies have kind of screwed up over time.
Or lost sight of.
They lose sight of. And sometimes, people will say, well, wait a minute, you're a publicly traded company. You have all these shareholders. Where do they fall on the priority list? I bet if you surveyed 1,000 of my shareholders and you would ask them who are the most important stakeholders, they would give you the exact same answer. Customers first, employees second, communities third, and then the shareholder will be rewarded if you take care of those three stakeholder groups.
Okay, so that's an interesting concept that you brought up. Envista, and I don't know if we mentioned this, is a large publicly traded company. You are the chief executive officer of a publicly traded company. There have been internal conversations, and I'll try to walk through this as, this is not a forward-looking statement, whatever disclaimer I need to make. But, MB2 has become of size to where we have thought about and we'll potentially explore what diving into the public markets looks like in the future. So with that being said, what public companies, running a public company, what are some of the things that, as you have now been elevated into this position, I realize Smith's also was public, so that may be a hard comparison, but a public company versus a private company, what are the differences that you've seen in your experience between the two, and leadership in the two, or just operations in the two for that matter?
Yeah. So it used to be that being a public company, meaning that any of us can buy the shares. You're publicly traded on one of these exchanges.
FTSE.
FTSE is a good example.
I just think that's so cute.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
They do wonderful stuff over there. So it used to be that being public did three things for a company. First, it gave you access to capital. That was the principal reason companies would want to go public. The second thing it would do would give liquidity. It would allow people who had equity that otherwise they couldn't sell on a public exchange. Now you can get liquid. And the third is that it tends to be better covered than private companies because there's a whole industry of equity research analysts who want to make recommendations on different stocks. And so it would allow companies a marketing vehicle. Today, the first one is no longer a consideration. As you know, MB2 has as much access to capital as it could ever want. It has people calling every day wanting to put money into it. So not so much the first one. The second one, yes, I think is still true. A public market is much larger, much more liquid than a private market. Of course, MB2's gone through a couple recaps, so your shareholders have gotten liquidity, but not as easily as if you were public. And I think people would tell you over time, public companies tend to have a slightly higher multiple. They tend to get a little bit more value for their EBIT. Maybe over time.
Yeah.
So that would be a second difference. And then the third is that marketing aspect. And the reason I mention that is because you'd say, what would be the main difference for you guys if you were public rather than private? Your attention, or at least Dr. V's attention and the senior team, would shift a little bit across those stakeholders. When you're private and you don't have to worry about the research analysts and the SEC and all the filings and all of the communication with the analysts, et cetera, all of your attention can go to those first three stakeholder groups, customers, your colleagues, your communities. When you're public, you have to shift some of your attention to that last group, the shareholders. And so I like that part of the job, but I don't like it as much as this, talking to your partners and your colleagues and your customers.
Yeah, pros and cons.
That's super, super cool. I think one of the things that I would be excited about is actually the flexibility. You mentioned the flexibility and not necessarily the access to capital. That is something that we absolutely do have, but the ability for, at that point in time, our partners, or the potential ability for our partners then to have more liquid or have access to liquidate and basically trade and understand the value of what they have on a daily basis. I think that's exciting. As we look forward,
that's the biggest difference.
So,
I think in your day-to-day lives, that would be the biggest change. Yeah.
So over your career, as you have gone again from brand marketing all the way to being the executive officer of multiple companies, what have you learned along the way, or has there been any wisdom or mentors or something that's maybe stuck with you that has either guided you, or you've just always said, hey, this is a principle? I know you've already mentioned, the stakeholders and who to really focus on, but anything else from a business perspective that's really guided you along the way?
I mean, it's a great question. When sometimes people ask the other side of the question, they'll say, what makes a great young talent? What makes a great employee? And I always say a great boss. The only difference between people who ascend the hierarchy and those who don't are those who had better training, better teachers, better mentors. And so my career is a function of, I would say strategic choice of boss. You would call it luck. I've just had some great bosses along the way. And so what have I learned from them? Yeah, you mentioned I started as a brand manager. I was the global brand manager for Betty Crocker Angel Food Cake. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but
Love Angel
Toot
Food
it.
Cake.
yeah,
Toot it. That's
it's
pretty cool.
probably the smallest product that General Mills sells. It's like only sold in 2 cities for 2 weeks, around Easter. But that was my first job. And the guy who was my boss is a guy named Brooks Geckler. This is 1991, 34 years ago.
That's when I was born.
Is that right?
Wow.
Yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
continue.
Fantastic.
I was not born in 1991, but I was not that old. I was 7, 8.
Yeah. Well, I was old enough to have a job in 1991. Anyway, Brooks remains a friend to this day. And he taught me a bunch of stuff. As you asked the question, one of the Brooks pearls of wisdom that still sticks with me, my first year-end review, Brooks, he pulled me aside and said, Paul, you know a lot. You grew up in this academic family. You're proud of that. Nobody really cares what you know until they know that you care. And I think that is a fundamental learning.
I love that.
It's so true.
It took me way longer to get it than I would like to admit, but nobody cares what you know until they know that you care.
Yeah. So that's something 34 years I've remembered, and it's served me well in everything I've done.
That's such a good nugget to take away.
Yeah. And then, I've had a bunch of other bosses. I worked for a first ballot Hall of Famer, a guy named Jim McNerney. He was a longtime GE executive. He left GE after Jack Welch retired, and he became CEO of 3M. He's the guy who turned 3M from, at that time, kind of an interesting but underperforming, basically an academic institution, into, for many years, a very high-performing industrial technology company. And Jim was an absolute student of leadership development and talent development. And so he could go on for hours. You drop a quarter in him, and he could just go on with lesson after lesson. But if you caught him when he didn't have a chance to compose his thoughts, and you said, Jim, just boil it all down. What does leadership really mean? He'd probably tell you 2 things. He'd tell you it's principally about energizing people and continually raising the bar. And then he'd say, a lot of good leaders are energizing. They're charismatic, they're optimistic, they're pleasant people. But if there's not a result as a consequence of their enthusiasm, even the most sort of positive people will eventually lose interest because it doesn't get any better.
Yeah.
That's what drives people is getting better. And then
Maybe
he'd
the
say,
reverse.
he'd say the opposite. There are a lot of
Yeah.
guys who can raise the bar, just through force of will. They can drive
Beating you down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The beatings will continue till morale improves. Yeah. But that only works for a short period of time. So you got to have the 2 put together. So that was another great learning.
That's
Energize
awesome.
others, raise the bar.
I love it.
That is awesome.
That is, I think, a really good takeaway from this. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to touch on?
Well, thousands of things. Yeah, I was hoping at some point you guys will call me back. And I don't want to use everything in the first podcast.
That is smart. This is going to be volume 1 of at least 4.
This could be good.
I love it. We can, we can really dive into your childhood growing up in Minnesota. We can talk hockey. We can, we could talk total football. There's lots we could do when you, if we have you back on and you're in and around. I know you've got a great busy schedule for the rest of the day today. So we will, I think we'll walk this one out now.
Thank you so much for coming. We
Thank
really
you
appreciate
guys.
it.
I can't thank you enough. You made it so easy, so much
It's
fun.
been fun.
And thanks to MB2. You guys are a great partner of ours, great customer, great colleagues. So it's great. It's great to be here.
Appreciate it.
Well, Paul, we appreciate it. MB2 Undergrounders, that's going to wrap another episode of the MB2 Underground podcast. We will see you guys next time.
See ya.
Peace.